In a cave, very close to a beach, there were many eggs, cared for by some older turtles. But that one of these eggs was very different from the others. It was much larger and had strange spots that didn't really fit a turtle egg at all. Eventually, the time came, one by one, little baby turtles hatched from the eggs. But from the big, special egg, nothing seemed to want to hatch. Several months passed, and the other baby turtles had already grown quite a bit when finally it happened. Something hatched from the egg, but it wasn't a turtle. Terrified, Alma, who had to look after the eggs that week, went to the older turtles and reported as fast as she could what she had seen. A green creature is hatched, but it has no shell like a normal turtle, and instead it has a pair of wings. And even now, so soon after hatching, it had teeth. They were much too big, and it must have been placed in our nest to eat the other eggs. The whole group of turtles discussed excitedly what they would do with the intruder. Only Marta, who hadn't been able to lay eggs for a long time and was actually already too old for a turtle baby, remained silent. Slowly, she walked to the spot where the creature had hatched it. It was sobbing miserably and looked terribly sad. "Everything will be all right, my little one. Nothing will happen to you. I will take care of it. Don't be afraid," she murmured gently and stroked the creature's back carefully. Indeed, the sobbing grew quieter and finally turned into a soft snore. Marta sat there for a while, continuing to stroke its back, when suddenly the other turtles appeared at the cave entrance. Alma reported that they had decided to throw the creature into the sea, far away from here, so that their eggs would be safe. But Marta shook her head. "I will take care of the little one, and right now there are no eggs here he could eat anyway. So would you just calm down? What would you think if you had just hatched and were simply thrown into the sea, without a mother, without a family, and with no plan at all? How mean! I won't allow it." After a short murmur, the turtles eventually agreed. For turtles were very peace-loving animals, and the thought of simply abandoning another baby animal didn't really please the others either. And so it happened that Marta named the little green creature Tooth, because he had such big teeth. Tooth grew up with the other turtle children and found some friends there, leading an almost completely normal turtle life. At first, he thought the only unusual thing about him was that he had no shell. But over the years, he noticed that nothing else about him was like the other turtles either. Where all the others grew slowly and barely got bigger each year, Tooth was already huge after just a few years, especially compared to the others. Even if he ducked as much as he could and tried to make himself small, it could not be hidden that Tooth was no normal turtle. The others mostly said nothing, but their looks told Tooth that they wondered about him again and again, and asked themselves why he was so different from everyone else. However, his best friend, Minnie, who was called that because she was smaller than all the others, could always cheer him up when he got into a bad mood because of it. "Don't be a frog," she would say then and laugh. Tooth didn't understand why that made her laugh, but her laughter was so contagious that every time he automatically felt better when he spoke with her. One day, the two were out again exploring the nearby forest. It was almost dark, and they were just about to head home when it happened. They heard an owl above them and marveled at how much it could turn its head. It was as if it didn't have to turn its whole body and could still see everything happening behind it. But at the same time, its little chick sneaked up from the front and startled her so much that she fell off the branch. Minnie howled with laughter, and Tooth could hardly contain himself either. He laughed harder than ever before. He laughed so hard that he found it difficult to breathe. And when he finally gasped for air, he suddenly felt very warm. Then he got really hot, and he noticed that the heat was coming from his belly. This heat, he realized in panic, was seeking its way out, and he also noticed that he couldn't stop it. He wanted to warn Minnie, but instead of words, something else came out of his mouth. A giant cloud of fire. He tried everything to smother the flames, but instead, hotter and hotter fire came out, and with horror, he noticed that he was still facing Minnie, because he had wanted to warn her, and all at once, the flames stopped. But what he saw, he could hardly bear. A turtle shell that was still smoking. Crying, he ran away, but not toward the turtle camp, instead in the opposite direction. He ran as long as his legs could carry him and never wanted to stop running. But eventually, exhaustion overcame him and he collapsed. Sobbing, he finally fell asleep and tried not to think about what had just happened. Eventually, the sun woke him and he looked around. Everything here looked very different from the beach where he and his mother Marta lived. There was no sand, there was no sea. Instead, huge stones and boulders could be seen everywhere. Slowly, he set off and started walking, without really having a goal. But after wandering around for some time, he finally got hungry. But he couldn't see any plants he could eat, far and wide. The sun was now high in the sky, but he didn't even notice the heat and kept wandering. Now he came to a cave overgrown with plants that he had actually discovered during one of his explorations with Minnie. And Minnie had said that you could eat these, but they were so bitter that you should only do so in an extreme emergency. At the thought of his friend, he wiped a tear from his eye and quickly shook his head to push the thought away and started eating instead. In fact, this plant didn't just taste nothing like Minnie had described it, it was incredibly delicious and he could hardly stop eating. As he did, he moved further into the cave and didn't notice a huge pair of eyes staring at him. Only when a deep voice spoke to him did Tooth startle. "What are you doing here, my little dragon?" the voice said. When he looked around, he noticed that the voice belonged to a creature that looked not unlike himself. This creature also had wings instead of a shell, and small puffs of smoke came from its mouth. "Dragon? I am a dragon?" Tooth whispered. "Of course," the voice replied, "just like me. Only you are a green dragon, while my scales are blue. But otherwise, there isn't much that distinguishes the two of us. My name is Alantaro, and who are you, and what brings you to my cave?" Haltingly, Tooth told him a story, and when he reached the part about the accidental fire breathing, he only whispered the words and became quieter and quieter. And when he finally stopped speaking, Alantaro sighed and said, "I can teach you how to control your fire and only breathe fire when you really want to, but are you even sure that your friend Minnie didn't just hide in her shell? Turtle shells are incredibly sturdy, and our fire would at most make a turtle sweat a little inside of the shell. Maybe you should check on your friend again, at least after I've taught you how to breathe your fire." "You mean maybe nothing happened to her at all?" Tooth whispered. And with new hope, he listened closely to Alantaro and learned in record time how to master his fire. When Alantaro was satisfied with his little student, they said goodbye to each other. and Alantaro noted that he could visit him any time if he had more questions about dragons, fire, or really anything else. Tooth thanked him repeatedly and ran off. "Next time, I'll teach you how to fly," Alantaro called out, but Tooth was way too impatient for that. He had to know what had happened to his friend Minnie. He had barely walked a few steps when he heard a familiar voice. Perplexed, he stopped. Normally, none of the turtles dared to go so far from the beach. It was his mother Marta, who was repeatedly calling his name. But he couldn't tell her what had happened to Minnie. What if she wasn't okay? And even if she was, he thought now, she surely would never want anything to do with him again. You don't burn your friends with fire, even if you are a dragon. He knew that much. So he hid in the bushes and waited until his mother had walked past. Tears ran down his cheek, and he hardly moved. Suddenly, however, he heard another voice, Minnie's voice, and his heart suddenly beat very fast in his chest. She was calling for him, he realized now, and hurriedly he jumped toward her, stumbled over his own words trying to apologize, but Minnie just hugged him very tightly and whispered, "Never run away again. We were so worried." Then finally Marta came too, and he jumped into her arms and tried in vain to apologize there as well. But no words came from his mouth, only a sob. But his mother Marta only stroked his back gently and whispered, "Everything will be all right." And Tooth believed her, because he was finally back with his family.